Hey everyone, welcome to this Learn Live session on protecting your virtual machines using Azure VM Backup. My name is Shubham Sangal. Uh, really excited to be a part of this session. It's going to be a packed session. I have Sharmistha Rai along with me. Sharmistha, how are you doing?
Hey, hi Shubham. I'm good. Thanks a lot for the introduction. And yeah, I agree with you. It's definitely going to be a packed session today. Happy
Yes,
to be
indeed.
here with you. So, hi everybody. I'm Sharmistha, and Shubham and I will be giving you a quick walkthrough. We are both product managers in the Azure Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery team. Today, we are joined by our moderator, Amy, and she will be keeping a check of all the questions and queries in the chat window. So feel free to drop by any questions that you have.
Guess what? This live session. So please feel free to drop a hi on the chat. Feel free to ask your questions. We'll try to review these questions and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible during this session. Uh, Alternatively, you can also follow this session on this AK link, ak.ms learn live 20230323A. I think it's matching the date pattern of today, 23/03/2023. So please feel free to use this AK link to follow the session, do the training, and yes. So, Sharmishta, let me ask you a question before moving ahead. What are we going to do in this session? What are we going to learn in this session? Any idea about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the main aim of the session is to teach our audience about Azure Backup. But before even jumping onto Azure Backup, we'll learn a little bit about why do we need backup, what are the different aspects of backup. Then we'll do a deep dive of what Azure Backup is, learn more about the architecture, and finally learn about all of the artifacts and various terms and terminologies required to actually enable backup on your Azure VM. So that's going to be the focus of this session, right? How to enable Azure Backup on your Azure VMs. We'll also have a demo where we'll show how to perform backup and restore of your Azure virtual machine. And then if we have time, then we'll just end with a short Q&A session to let the audience also ask their questions. So that's what it's going to be about. And I think that gives a perfect opening for me to ask you, Shubham. So tell me, what what is backup, right? Why do customers need backup in today's environment? What are the requirements which actually uh, enforce us to enable backup?
I think, Sharmishta, yeah, we have asked a pretty good thing at this point. Uh, there are various use cases where a solution like Azure Backup is needed. Uh, Imagine you are an enterprise, you're running business critical workload, and you may end up in situations like ransomware. We hear about it very frequently. Data corruption, say you have due to some reason the data gets corrupted. It may be due to some faulty patch that you might have applied and the data got corrupted. Data deletion, due to some reason, say due to accidental deletion, or say a ROG admin got access to your system and they intentionally deleted your data. Or it may be an outage, it may be a natural outage, or it may be a man-made outage. All the situations are there. These are the use cases where you have your data and you might end up having some issues with your data, and then you don't want to end up in a situation that your data is lost and which is impacting your business. So all in all, in all the scenarios, you need a product like Azure Backup to help you uh, give you assurance and recover you quickly so that it impacts your business on a minimal basis and you are covered. That is where I feel we need a solution like Azure Backup.
That makes absolute sense. And I think another one is compliance, right? So I keep hearing about customers who want to ensure that backup has been enabled on their mission critical workloads because they want to be compliant with the industry standards, and they also want to make sure that their data is backed up for a number of years, whatever the industry mandates them to do so. Like some customers have enabled backups, and their backups are supposed to stay present for hundreds of years. That's a lot of time, and that's a big requirement to actually achieve.
No, I think you've added a very important use case, and it's needed by a lot of companies, by a lot of sectors. So compliance is also one of the very important use case for having Azure Backup as a product to be used.
Yeah, awesome. So I think that will just lead perfectly into my next question on why don't you define Azure Backup for us? Like what does our product do?
So, Sharmistha, uh, we have talked about and discussed about uh, uh, the various use cases when we need to use Azure Backup. And the common theme in all this is data. Data today is very important, and you might use some traditional backup solution, but they would not help you in scenarios like management at scale, or they would not, or more often or not, these solutions would end up becoming very costly and expensive for you. Uh, and you may use data redundancy, but just data redundancy is not going to help you uh, very much. So this is where you need a solution like Azure Backup. So to define it, Azure Backup is a built-in Azure product or service that helps you protect and backup your Azure managed data assets and recover quickly in case of any issues. Uh, it you with using Azure Backup, you enjoy the scale that Azure as a cloud provides. Uh, it's a very simple solution, very intuitive. With just few clicks, you can just configure your backup and you can restore quickly. Secure. I think this is very important thing that would be a theme for our session, and we would cover it more going forward. But yes, it protects you from a lot of scenarios. You get protection from ransomware, accidental deletion. All this is something that we will cover more in the session going forward. Cost effective again. Uh, there is no infrastructure cost, too much of infrastructure cost involved when using Azure Backup. We take care of that. There is no management overheads. So with other solutions, with traditional solutions, you might have to have a lot of management overheads, but here it's very minimal. And on top of that, Azure Backup has a lot of flexibility in terms of its offerings, which we will cover in terms of tiers that we have to offer. So that is where Azure Backup truly becomes a cost-effective solution. Management at scale, I would say it's a very important pillar for anyone to use as your backup. Just imagine a scenario: you are a BCDR admin and of an enterprise, and you are responsible for managing backup and DR requirements of all the workloads of that company or an enterprise. So uh, you have to take care of different workloads, and there are a lot of workloads, and you have to remain on top of all the things just to make sure things are working fine. This is where backup comes into the picture. Your backup comes into the picture. It has offerings like Backup Center, which we are going to talk about. So Backup Center would give you a consolidated view of different things like how the protection status of your workloads, how was the last recovery point. All these things will be covered by Backup Center. And on top of that, Azure Backup has integration with Azure Monitor, which gives you a consistent experience of notification along with other Azure services. uh, as a bstd admin, you can configure settings in your Azure Backup to be notified through various ways of any critical operation that might have happened and might impact you. So you are always up to date of what is happening. You can review your usage. This helps in your auditing. So I would say management at scale is again a very important factor or a pillar of Azure Backup as a product. Last but not the least, uh, diverse workload support. So Azure Backup has uh, uh, in terms of offering. It's not just VM backup, which is the theme of this session. You have a lot of different workloads that can be supported by Azure Backup, not only from Azure but even from on-prem. So all in all, it's a true consolidated offering with a lot of features, which gives you assurance to you as a BC admin of a company, and it gives you peace of mind that yeah, you are protected. Uh, with this, Sharmistha, I have a question for you. So we talked about diverse workload support, and we talked about a lot of things of different use cases. So should we discuss about the different workloads that backup support and different scenarios and features that Azure Backup supports? Should we touch upon that and discuss that to give our viewers an idea of that?
Oh, think that would
One
be a
thing to
great
one
way.
Yes, one thing that
Yeah,
I
that
think
would
I
be a
think
great way to start the slides. But I think
so.
there is one question which I think you're also going to just ask. So I'll just let you go ahead and cover it up.
So I want to check one thing before we move to that part. A lot of customers do ask when and how to configure backup and DR. What are the use case for us to use backup? What are the use case for us to use disaster recovery or site recovery as a solution? So, what are your feedbacks or inputs on this particular question?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And given that both of us work on both the products, this is a question that we frequently hear about from our customers. And the use cases that both of the offerings cover are entirely different. Disaster recovery actually allows you to quickly recover from a disaster into a secondary location. Now, this could be a disaster of a natural kind, or it could be some attack, some data center outage. Basically, anything which affects your primary data center where your workloads are running. Whereas backup is more towards protecting your data from any type of corruption, any type of data loss, or any type of attack, let's say a ransomware attack, which could actually end up affecting your data, which is present in your original location. So, backup aims towards data protection and ensuring that your data is retained for a really long amount of time. Whereas site recovery aims towards actually ensuring that your workloads are up and running in the smallest amount of time in case a natural disaster happens. So, yeah, I think we believe that for mission critical workloads, both are actually required, right? You want your data to be safe and secure, and at the same time, in case something bad happens, you always want to have that data handy and have your machines up and running within minutes in another location which is not being disrupted by these issues. So that's where disaster recovery steps in, and that makes the complete cycle, right? You have your data protected and also readily available in other region in case of any disaster. So yeah, that's that's how it comes in.
That's a great explanation. One question, Sharmistha. A lot of customers do use factors like their RTO requirements and RPO requirements to benchmark what type of solution do they want to use. So, does that also govern the backup and disaster recovery usage? Would you want to just tell us about that as well?
That's a great question. And even before answering, like I would like to define what is RTO and what is RPO. RTO defines the amount of time it would need for your machines to be up after a disaster or after any issue with your primary workloads. RPO defines the amount of data which you will lose in case of a disaster or an outage. So, for a machine which is a tier 0 or a tier 1 machine, you would want both the RTO and RPO to be in minutes. Your machine should be up and out of an outage in minutes, and the data loss should also be in minutes. Whereas there are some tier 2 or tier 3 machines where you can actually go through a loss of, let's say, 24 hours. So if your machines are not running for 24 hours, you are okay with that. Similarly, not a lot of data change is happening on these. So if data of last 24 hours is lost, you are okay to do with that also. And that's another place where disaster recovery and backup differ from each other. disaster recovery solutions aim to provide an RTO and RPO of very small time. So let's say for our case, Azure Site Recovery provides RPO of 5 minutes, and we say that the RTO is less than 2 hours. So your maximum data loss would be of 5 minutes, and your machines would be up and running in less than 2 hours. Whereas for backup, both these numbers can be a little higher. Most customers set up backup so that it just happen once in day, maybe in off business hours. So your maximum data loss could be 24 hours. And because the data is humongous, it's just kept in somewhere, the recovery time also increases with backup. In disaster recovery, the snapshots are being taken very frequently, and that's why it's easier to have those machines up and running in a short amount of time. So that's how the whole concept kind of comes in together and gives us a full picture of how exactly RPO and RTO come into the situation when we are trying to decide what to use and what to set up on different types of machines. I hope that that answered your question, Shubham.
No, that really helped. So I think what you're trying to say is RTO and RPO can be used to you can as a user I can define my RTO and RPO requirements, and based on that take a decision of which solution I want to use, uh,
That's correct.
disaster
Yeah.
recovery or backup, and then go ahead. All right, this is very helpful, Sharmistha. I'll again come back to my earlier question before this. Why should we not, should we discuss the different workloads that Azure Backup support, different scenarios, different features to give a flavor to our viewers of what Azure Backup has to offer?
Yeah. So I think I'll quickly switch over to the architecture slide. And this is the complete view of what Azure Backup looks like, right? So we have the workload support, which makes the bottom tier. Then we have the managed storage, which is the middle tier where the actual data plane resides. And finally, the top tier is the management plane. So I'll start with the bottom tier, which is the diverse workload support. This is the workload integration layer. We have native integration with Azure VMs, SQL HANA VMs, even the specialized DB workloads, right? Like SQL Server and SAP HANA, which are running on Azure VMs. Those are supported by Azure Backup. We also support Azure Files, and we recently have added support for Azure PostgreSQL also. So this is where the question comes in, like what do we use for each of those workload supports? And of course, the technology involved in supporting each of these workloads is very different from each other, right? So for VM backup, we actually use disk snapshots, whereas for Azure Files, we use file snapshots. For SQL and SAP HANA, there is a mix of technologies which we are working on and which we are using to actually enable the whole support. So we are actually using stream-based backup along with other technologies to ensure that SQL and HANA are actually supported by Azure Backup. And meanwhile, we're also working on storage-based snapshots. So this will allow us to enhance our backup support and also ensure that we are performing log based streaming to still continue so that customers can perform the point in time recovery. Now, apart from all these Azure workloads, we also have support for on-prem servers. So that's where three of our other services come into the picture. First one is SCDPM, which stands for System Center Data Protection Manager. So this is an on-prem solution, of course, and it's a part of the System Center suite. You can actually deploy SCDPM on any of the server or VM which has dedicated storage. And this supports a variety of workloads. We have VMware support, we have Hyper-V support, we even have application support for applications like Exchange, SharePoint, SQL. So these not only perform file like complete disk backup, but also perform file and folder backup. In SCDPM, you can actually have a short-term replica of the backup, which will be on the disk. and you can offload the long-term retention to the Azure Recovery Services world. We'll talk more about Azure Recovery Services world, but yeah, that's an entity which you will hear a lot about in this presentation. The second on-prem solution which we have is Microsoft Azure Backup Server, which also stands for MABS. So MAPS is also based on SCDPM only, but the only difference is that it's not packaged as a part of System Center. It's actually sold separately. So anybody who has an Azure subscription can go ahead and download it and install it on your on-prem machine, and then ultimately use it for performing short-term backups, which again can be on-prem. And then for longer-term backup, you can offload the data to recovery services world. And last, which we have is Mars Agent, which stands for Microsoft Azure Recovery Services Agent. This caters specifically to the Windows Server environment and solution. So it's a direct to cloud option, which allows customers to back up their files, folders, tapes, and disks to Azure directly, and ensure that their data is always safe at all times. So that completes the whole workload support which we have, and I think that gives me a topic to ask Shubham about that. Hey Shubham, why don't you tell me about the data plane, right? So we have the workload support present already. What is happening in between the workloads and the data plane? How are they interacting? How does the whole thing play out?
Before I answer your question, Sharmistha, it's a very impressive workload list that Azure Backup offers, and thanks for giving this context to us. Moving to your question, before moving to the data layer, I think just a very small caveat about the networking. So you take snapshot; those snapshots are transferred, the data transfer. So this data transfer happens over a secure network, and it's pretty secure. And now the data plane layer, the middle layer, is something that comes into picture. And I would want to spend some time on the right side of your screen, basically the security part. We did touch upon that initially, but this is a time for us to discuss about that in a bit more detail. So Azure Backup stores data in an isolated and independent environment, which is very secure, which provides great security and very difficult to access. Uh, so how it interaction works is it allows managed operations on top of that. So as you mentioned that there is something called recovery service vault. So recovery service vault is the abstraction of that data storage, and that you can perform and access perform various managed operation on that data. So you would not want everyone to have all the access. So I think the what is logical is depending on what job someone needs to do, accordingly you'll provide them the access levels. Say uh, you might have someone with all the access, like they can trigger a backup, they can trigger a restore, they can even disable backup and delete your backup data. This is a very critical piece, and you would want only few people to have such sort of access. Maybe to some other person you would want to give the permission or role of just having triggering backup and restore, but not deletion. They would not want to delete the backup and disable the backup. To the some other person you would just want to give the view permission. You can just view and monitor the uh, uh, backup status and restore status, but you would not want to give them the permission or the access to trigger backup and restore. This is where the first pillar RBAC comes into the picture. RBAC means resource-based access controls. So RBACs allow you to grant access based on the access level that you would want to provide to the person. So different persons in your team would have different access level, and accordingly you can give them different RBACs so that they can perform their job. So it's very secure. And even if say someone is able to access your system, uh, even after this security, data is Azure Backup stores data in an encrypted format. By default, we would use the platform managed key, but there are customers who wants to use their own key, which we call as custom managed key or CMK. They would store those CMK in Azure key vaults and use them to encrypt the data. This brings more control and more security to your data. We have that flexibility to use CMK to back to protect your backed up data in an encrypted format when it's stored. Let's say even after this, something happens. This is where the third pillar comes into the picture: enhanced protection. Now it's a mixture of various important capabilities that Azure Backup has to offer. Let us assume a scenario that your data gets accidentally deleted, or somehow your data gets deleted and you don't want to delete it and you want it back. By default, Azure Backups stores your deleted data for 14 days in a soft deleted state, so that within 14 days of deleting that data, you can retrieve the data back. That is a very powerful functionality, right? Uh, on top of that, what we has to offer is multi-user authorization (MUA). So uh, you can configure various critical operations to be MUA protected. Uh, you would want authorization from some other person as well. That is why it's multi-user. That again provides a safety layer or a security layer on top of the existing security capabilities that Azure Backup has to offer. And the third interesting thing is immutability. We talked about recovery service vault. What we can do is customers have a flexibility to make the recovery service vault as immutable. Now what does immutability means? So sometimes you would want that your recovery points should not be deleted at all. So what you can do is you can go to your recovery service vault, set your recovery service vault as immutable, and it will ensure that any operation that will lead to deleting your recovery point will not be allowed. That is where immutability comes into picture. So keeping all this into a flow, all these are great security features which will ensure that your data is truly protected and you have data when you need it. So this covers my right pillar of built-in security that Azure Backup has to offer. Coming to the middle part of this data plane layer, access tiers. So I think we'll use some terms a lot during the session: recovery points, snapshots, and this is where Azure Backup uses this term. So recovery points. So I'll just explain what recovery points is. It's nothing but the copy of your backed up data, and snapshot is just a point in time of your data. So when Azure Backup is triggered, it takes a snapshot and it's stored locally along with disk. And then the data is also transferred to the vault. So the data is stored in an isolated environment, and we have different tiers to that. We have standard tier, we have archive tier. We'll deep dive more into this. Why do we need which tier and when to use which tier? All this is something which I'm going to cover and we are going to cover in the later part of the session. But yeah, just to give you a flavor of what we are trying to convey, we have different access tiers, different type of recovery points: snapshot tier recovery point, vault tier recovery point, which gives you a lot of flexibility when having a backup offering. So this covers about access tiers, Sharmistha. Coming to the next part, I would want to ask you one question. There is different redundancy option in Azure Backup. What is the flexibility? What are the benefits of using which redundancy option? And what are the use cases to set up different redundancy option that Azure Backup has to offer? Would you like to clarify that for us?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, Shubham. So, uh, your data is actually as safe as your backup data. So, I think both the data should be treated and equal with an equality that is present, and that's where the whole redundancy option comes into the picture, right? So we have three options available for the customers. First is LRS, then we have ZRS, and then we have GRS. So LRS stands for locally redundant storage. In this case, this is the low cost, it's the lowest cost option available to all our customers. And what actually happens here in this case is that we ensure that multiple copies of your backup data are stored in various nodes in the same data center in the same region. So this type of redundancy option ensures that if there is any nodal outage, let's say some disk or some drive stops working in a data center, then your backup data would still be present and available for you to use or to backup from in another node. Now, the second option is ZRS, which is zonal redundant storage. In this case, we ensure that the data is also copied into various zones. So in LRS, the data is copied in the same zone, but in case, or we don't even know what zone they're in, but in case of ZRS, we ensure that the data is copied in various zones. And in case of a zonal outage, you will have an option to still uh, access your backup data as it's present in a zone which has not been affected by an outage. But both of these options, they're actually only talking about the primary region, right? So the data center has different nodes in the same region, and a data center could have different zones, but that's also in the same region. The third option, which is GRS, that's the most I think abundant option in case of the redundancy that we allow. And it's also the default option for a recovery services vault. Whenever a recovery services vault is created, it is of the type GRS. And the best part of GRS is that it is what is suggested for mission critical workloads. In this case, we ensure that there are 6 copies, 3 copies in the primary region that you are in, and 3 copies in an Azure paired region. This is a secondary region we are talking about. It's not the primary region where your workloads are running. So with GRS, your data will be present in another region which is totally not connected with your primary region. In case of any disaster, in case of any outage, in case of any data corruption, you can always roll back over to the data which is present in another region and actually access it. So obviously GRS is a little costlier than other options. And that's all the redundancy options which are present for us. Um, as I mentioned before, a vault is created with the GRS option, but users can always change the redundancy option after a vault has been created. Um, but if you have enabled backup, then the redundancy option cannot be changed. It can only be changed if there are no backup items available in the vault. So that's one gotcha which you have to take note of whenever you're creating a recovery services vault. Next, we move on to the management plane. So um, we Shubham talked when we just started talking about Azure Backup, he talked about simplicity. He talked about management at scale, and that's where the whole management plane comes into the picture, right? So we have various recovery. A customer can create various recovery services vault depending on the need of their own infrastructure. Maybe they want to have different workloads in different vaults and some kind of business bifurcation they want to make. So each vault can have a number of backup policies. These policies will control how their backup is done, what is the frequency of their backup, how long is their backup retained. All this is controlled by backup policies. Now, all of these operations of creating a vault, creating a policy, enabling backup, all of this is possible via portal, via SDKs, CLI. So we are providing all options to our customers to actually go ahead and use backup. Now, what makes the management plane so easy to use? And that's where one of the main selling factors comes into the picture, which is zero infrastructure. So to use Azure Backup, you don't need to set up any infrastructure because Azure Backup is integrated into the platform. So we provide all the services for all the core capabilities and workloads which are part of the Azure without asking customers to set up infrastructure or to manage the storage which is associated with setting up the infrastructure or backup. So all of the handling is being done by ourselves, and the management overload is taken away from the customers by a huge percentage, right? So it's easier to manage, and then that's where backup center comes into the picture. So previously, we had various walls, and the whole bifurcation was happening on the basis of walls. But with the backup center coming into the picture, that bifurcation has also gone away. You can actually get an inventory of all your workloads at scale, and you can perform various kinds of audits and ensure that various reports are present for all your workloads. Ensure that you can check what kind of pricing is happening, where you are losing out money, how were the last restore operations, is backup happening properly for all of the workloads. All those questions at play, they can easily be covered with backup center. Oh, that was a lot of data that I just talked about. So I hope you were paying attention. And yeah, that completes the complete set of
I
features and
think Sharmish have
scenarios.
given a lot of comprehensive details of the features and the scenarios and the workloads that the Azure Backup offers and solves for
Yeah,
us.
yeah, Shubham. And I think we have talked a lot about Azure Backup, and that's the perfect time. Now is the perfect time to actually talk about the topic of our discussion today, right? How to back up Azure virtual machines. We've talked about all the various workloads, but in this session we are focusing on Azure VMs. So I'll just hand it over to you and let you talk about the backup of Azure VMs specifically.
All right. Yeah, as you mentioned, the focus of this session is going to be backing up Azure VM backups. It's a very simple solution. You can easily back up and restore your Azure VMs. Um, Azure Backup takes snapshot of the disks attached to the VM at a interval specified by the user, and then those snapshots are transferred to the recovery service vault. Now, I think we are hearing this term recovery services vault a lot. It has come now as well. So I think it's a perfect time for us to discuss about recovery service vault. So it's like the center of the full Azure backup. Uh, it's a place where you manage all your backup operations. Recovery service vault stores your data uh, based on the recovery service vault. All the settings, all the operations, all the managed operations are performed. Recovery service vault provides you all these features that we've discussed: security, monitoring, etc. So it's like the centerpiece of this whole machinery. There are a lot of moving parts, but yes, what is the center or the core of his recovery service vault. Now on your screen, you're seeing a screenshot that we've taken from recovery service vault. So recovery service vault is an arm entity. It's it's deployed like an arm entity, and the screen on your the particular this particular screen shows as the screenshot that we have taken from a recovery service vault, and particularly a screen from a backed up item. And as you can see that this particular screen gives you uh, overview of different backup status or stats, like the pre-checks, the status of backup, the backup policy you're using, and below you can see a list of all your recovery points. As I mentioned, recovery points is nothing but a copy of your backed up data. And one thing that moving ahead, Sharmishta, I would want to ask you one question before moving ahead. What we can see in our the screen at the bottom part is the consistency type, uh, application consistent. What exactly this consistency means? What options of consistency are there? Uh, can we discuss about that and give viewers a idea about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that gives me a chance to talk about the various consistency options available today, right? So The first option is the application consistent snapshot. Now, this is available and this is applied by default on all the backups which are happening. Application consistent snapshot are a little heavier in the terms of resources that they require for the snapshot to happen, solely because it actually covers the snapshot covers the data which is in the disk and also in the memory. So it's getting a complete picture of all the data and all the applications which are running on a particular VM. So yeah, it's little heavier, but it covers everything from A to Z. It uses VSS writer to capture the content of the machine memory and the in-disk data, and finally performs the snapshot. Now, for Linux machines, this is not enabled by default, and you will actually have to use pre and post scripts to ensure that application consistent snapshots can take place. Now, what is the fallback mechanism? Let's say application consistent snapshot taking fails. So, what happens then? In that case, Azure VM Backup ensures that file system consistent snapshots are being taken. So, in this case, if we let's say VSS fails on the Windows VM, or the pre and post scripts are not working as expected, and ultimately snapshot was not taken, the application consistent snapshot was not taken. In that case, we go ahead and take a file system consistent snapshot. Now, the third scenario is when the VM itself is turned off. So let's say the VM was turned off due to some issues, or maybe you rebooted a VM and it's just taking a lot of time for it to come back online. What happens in that scenario? That's where our last snapshot option comes into the picture, which is the crash consistent snapshot. Uh, the thing about crash consistent snapshot is that it only takes a snapshot of all the data which is present on the disk and not of the data which is in memory, etc. And obviously, because the VM is turned off, so the in-memory data is out of the picture. So uh, in this case, the amount of IO operations or the memory burden required is very less for crash consistent snapshot. But the catch here is that you will never get a full picture of how the VM was or what was its state using a crash consistent snapshot, because the data is not complete. It's not as complete as our application consistent snapshot. So these are the three options available, and by default we take the application consistent snapshot. So now that we have covered about the consistency options, I think we should also talk about the recovery types, which is another field which I see in this screenshot, right, Shubham? So what are these? What is the vault and snapshot mentioned under recovery type here?
All right. So I think this ties down to the recovery point discussion that we have been
Shubham, I
having.
cannot hear you properly. Can
Yeah. Am I
Yeah, it's
audible now,
better.
Shamishta?
Yes,
So,
yes.
yeah, so sorry for that. So this ties down to the recovery point discussion that we have been having. What are the different types of recovery point available in Azure Backup? So let's discuss that. And before that, I think it makes a lot of we are at a logical point to discuss about a very other important pillar of Azure backup policy. So as you've defined uh, in the that diagram, backup policy again is very important for a user to use. It helps user to configure the frequency at what they want to take a backup. This will help them schedule the backup jobs, uh, and this will help them define what is the duration that they want to retain the backup, how old data they want. All this is something that they can control and configure as a part of backup policy. Sometimes organizations, what they do is they would want to take backup in off hours, say at the end of the day when the whole day's job is done, and when it's not that peak time, they would configure their backup policy in such a way that backup is triggered in this off hours. And accordingly, different companies, different people, different users may have different requirements, and all that can be encompassed in backup policy. Now, after having a discussion and understanding what backup policy is, we need to understand different type of recovery points. So on a very high level, I can say that Azure Backup supports two tiers or two types of recovery. One is from the snapshot tier, other is from the vault tier. So just to give you a context of both of this and the difference between both of this, Azure Backup takes snapshot of the disk. So snapshot is nothing but a point in time of the disk stored locally along with disk. And hence, when you try to restore using a snapshot type of recovery point, recovery would be quicker. So from that, now there is a limit that you can't have unlimited number of snapshots. And we need a mechanism, as you mentioned, that we need a longer retention. There may be scenarios where the customer would want a lot of a very old data. And that is where snapshot tier would have a limitation that we can't have unlimited number of snapshot. So we have a offering called Vault tier recovery points, where the data from snapshot tier gets transferred to the vault. So as you can see in this diagram on the bottom part of your screen, there is a VM. The snapshot of the VM is taken, and that snapshot gets transferred to the recovery service vault, which is the isolated and independent storage. And here, this recovery point is called a vault tier recovery point. So snapshot is taken and then it's transferred to the vault. And that is the difference between snapshot tier and vault tier. Now, since this vault tier recovery point is an isolated environment, and if you're trying to restore using this vault tier recovery point, the recovery time might be slightly larger as compared to snapshot tier, because you need to retrieve the data from that isolated storage. And again, recovery service vault comes into the picture. Recovery service vault provides an abstraction on this vault tier recovery point. Not just this, even the vault tier has two types of access tiers. One is your standard tier, other is your archive tier. uh, Archive tier is nothing but sometimes company would want to store very old data due to some compliance reason, but that data might not be accessed a lot. So what companies prefer is to archive that data. The benefit is those since those older data points might not be accessed a lot, you still want to use keep them in your repo. So you would archive them and you can save a cost. That is the difference between a standard tier of vault and the archive tier uh, of vault. And that is where you can basis on your budget, basis uh, on requirements, you can decide to archive your recovery points. Now, not all recovery points can be archived. There are some factors that you need to keep in mind, that the recovery point should be this much old. You should have a monthly recovery point, yearly recovery point. So there are some constraints that you need to look, and meeting those constraints only you will be eligible to archive a recovery point. So this covers the different recovery types that Azure Backup has to offer. A lot of flexibility is there. In case you want faster restore, you use snapshot tier. In case you want to store data for longer time, you'll use vault tier. And that this combination makes Azure Backup uh, a very powerful functionality. And all this thing is governed by backup policy. So backup policy helps you determine how much snapshot tier recovery points you want to store, how much vault tier recovery points you want to store. All this is governed by your backup policy.
Oh, awesome. That really explains, I think, all the artifacts that will ultimately be required in backing up an Azure VM, right? So I think now is a good time to just explain our viewers what is the backup process for an Azure virtual machine. Now that we are aware of all the entities which will come into play here, Shubham, why don't you explain the exact process?
All right. So we've discussed about backup policy. Uh, a user needs to configure a backup policy, which will basically help scheduling backup. So once backup job is scheduled, once the backup job is triggered, uh, a backup extension gets installed on the VM. Now this backup extension interacts with the components on the VM. Say in Windows, it interacts with the components that you mentioned while explaining consistency thing, and interacting with components, it will take snapshots of the VM. That is how the process is, and this is what has been depicted in the diagram on the left side of your screen. uh, Post that, the snapshot, as we mentioned, snapshot gets transferred to the vault, which make it a vaultier sort of recovery point. Now, few things to note over here is, you might have multiple disks attached to VM. Uh, the data or snapshot or recovery, the data transfer might happen in parallel. This provides a lot of efficiency. And when the data is transferred, it's not that we will transfer all the data every time. We do a comparison, and only the data which gets changed gets transferred. So we call it sort of incremental backup. And this helps you save a lot of cost, since we are not transferring all the data every time when we are creating a recovery point. Only the incremental data is transferred, which makes sure there is a lot of efficiency involved. So this explain the whole backup process, how the backup job is triggered, how the snapshots are taken, how the data transfer happens uh, to the vault. So this gives a picture of that.
Oh, awesome. I think, yeah, that clears up the complete picture, and it actually puts into the scene of the players like backup policy and the vault and the actual backup service. So now we know how each of the players is coming in and performing their acts. And this completes the theory also, right? So I think it's time to get into some action and actually perform an exercise or a demo for our viewers. Or maybe perform a backup and restore of an Azure virtual machine. What do you think, Shubham?
Yes, we should just so I think as a part of demo, before moving to the demo screen, we should discuss what is going to be a part of demo. So what we will try to do during this demo is, although if you see the training module, there are different things involved, uh, like create a virtual machine, use command line interface, use different mechanism to create a VM, different mechanism to back up a VM, view the status of the backup. We would focus on creating or configuring a backup using Azure portal as a part of this demo. We would already have created a VM. Since creating a VM would have taken some time during this session, so we have VMs created, and we would configure backup using Azure portal as a part of this session. We would also review monitoring, few pieces of monitoring and status and all during this demo. Last but not the least, what we'll try to cover is, we'll also try to restore a virtual machine. We'll show you how you can restore, how you can backup, the nitty-gritties of restore. We'll try to show you as a part of the demo flow. So this will be the agenda of this short demo. Um with this, Sharmistha, please allow me to jump to the demo screen.
Sure.
I can see the demo screen. So the screen that you're currently seeing on your uh, screen is the recovery service vault. So as we mentioned, it's a entity. Currently, this is a recovery services vault which we have created for this demo purposes with the name App VM Backup Vault. And as soon as you create a recovery service vault, this will be the home screen. Before actually configuring backup, showing you a few backed up VMs, showing you how that work, let's just very quickly just review a few things that we've discussed. So if you go to the settings properties of this demo, you'll see uh, settings like immutable vault. We discussed about immutable vault during the security discussion that we have been having. Multi-user authorization. Again, this is again a security feature that we discussed during this part of this session. So all the security features are covered as a part of recovery service vault properties, and that is why what make recovery service vault as an abstraction of a lot of powerful capabilities that Azure Backup has to offer. So this is about different properties that we discussed. Now, before actually showing you back the VMs and configuring backup, I would also want to click on backup policies, which forms an important pillar. We've discussed on that. These are some policies that are already created. If you want to create a new policy, you can just go to manage backup policies of a recovery service vault, click on add. Since the focus is on Azure Virtual Machine, we'll click on Azure Virtual Machine. And here is a page which will help you create a backup policy that will help you determine the scheduling and retention of your backup and recovery points. By default, we have standard backup policy selected, so we'll keep it as it is. We have the features listed. You can give a policy name here. Test policy is what I am putting. Backup scheduling. Now, as we mentioned, a backup policy will help you uh, govern what should be your how frequently your backup should be scheduled. Do you want it scheduled on a daily basis? Do you want to schedule it on a weekly basis? This is where you can control and configure that. And the time of the day. So sometimes enterprise would want to trigger backup in off hours. So depending on what your business needs are, how when do you want to schedule it, you can schedule it, say 4:30 p.m., 7:30 p.m. The times can be selected, and the time zone. So we have different time zones. Just select the time zone. This will govern your backup frequency. Now, instant restore. We've just discussed different recovery types available in backup: snapshot tier and vault tier. Instant restore is your snapshot tier. As we mentioned that uh, a snapshot tier are helps you fast restore. That is why the label you are seeing is the instant restore. So by default, it is 2 days that is set. And for a standard backup policy, you can have any value between 1 to 5. By default, it's 2. So as we mentioned, there is a limit of number of snapshot tier recovery points you have. You can't have unlimited recovery point. That is where and you might have requirement to have older data. That is where your vault tier comes into the picture. And vault tier retention is governed using your retention range uh, fields that are here. You can set up your vault tier daily retention, how many days of recovery point in vault tier you want. You can have your you can even have weekly retention set. Say you want to have a volunteer recovery point retained on every Sunday of the week for 12 weeks. Similarly, for monthly backup point, monthly retention, you can have a recovery point or a monthly recovery point for the months you want to retain it. Similarly, yearly recovery points. Tiering is nothing but you can also decide or configure the recovery points for archive tier, which can help you save cost. So this is after doing that, you can just click on create, and this will create your backup policy, which will control and which will schedule your backup jobs as per the scheduling that you've defined here, as per the retention that you've defined here. So you can just click on create here. It takes some time to click create a backup policy. So I am not creating a backup policy now, keeping time constraints into mind. I'll just show you a few example of backup policy that we created. This is a backup policy that we created. Uh, we've set the backup scheduling on daily basis at 12 a.m. UTC plus 5:30. Instant recovery snapshots are to be retained for 2 days, and daily backup volunteer retention is for 180 days. So this is my policy, which we would be using in this demo. You can choose to update it by modifying the fields and clicking on update. So this covers the backup policy part, which I wanted to just give a glimpse before going to configuring backup, on how to configuring backup and just reviewing few backed up VMs. Now let's move to section where we review how to back up a VM. So what I'll do is I'll again in this vault uh, the navigation section, I'll come to the backup items. Will review Azure virtual machine. These are the two VMs that I've backed up for demo purposes. But before reviewing this, let's see how you can configure backup on a VM. So click on add over here. A backup goal screen comes by default. Virtual machine is selected. You'll just need to click on backup over here since we are focusing on virtual machine or VM workload. And you get this configure backup screen. The first thing is to select a policy. It creates a default policy if you want, or even if you can select an existing policy. So I have a policy created which we just reviewed. I'll select backup policy 2. You'll see the details of policy over here that it will do a backup. It will schedule a backup at 12 a.m. every day on a daily basis. The snapshot tier instant restore recovery points will be stored for 2 days. Uh, the vault tier daily backup retention is for 180 days. Now, what you can do is after reviewing all this, just click on add over here. And here are the VMs that are not backed up and are available for backup. So I select one of the VM. I click on OK. Some validation happens over here, and you see that VM added. You also have flexibilities to select few disks while backing up. That flexibility is there. And after doing this, you just click on enable backup, and that will configure backup on this VM. So this is how you configure backup on a VM. This is the process that you can follow. Now, what I'll do is I'll show you few VMs on which I have already configured backed up, and we can review that because enable backup will take some time, and a recovery point will only be created based on this frequency that we have scheduled. So what I'll do is I'll show you the VMs that have already been backed up. So this is one VM which we created, app VM1. It's in this resource group, and we'll show the details to you. So I guess this was a screenshot on the deck that we reviewed a few minutes back. So this is the backed up screen. You get to see the different variables or fields, which recovery service vault we're using, the subscription details, alerts, jobs, backup breach status, backup status, the backup policy that we're using, oldest recovery point, etc. and etc. And on the bottom part of the screen, you get to see a list of different recovery points, their consistency, uh, the recovery type, etc. So if you see that you have two recovery points here created on 22 and 23rd of March. Uh, uh, Created on 22 and 20, the last 2 day recovery points in snapshot and vault tier, and the rest in the vault tier. The reason is since in this policy we have set 2 days of snapshot retention. So the thing is the last two recovery points are in snapshot as well, because you have set uh, retention of 2 days for snapshot, and at the end of and these snapshots are also transferred to the vault. So these are tagged both as snapshot and vault standard. But if you see the recovery points before 2 days, or excluding this the last two recovery points, they have been removed, and that is why you see only the vault standard. So this is how we get to know that sometimes a recovery point can be in snapshot tier as well, and even in vault tier as well. That is how it's tagged at snapshot and vault standard. When a recovery point is just in vault, it's tagged as vault standard. So this is an overview uh, of how a backed up VM looks. We have seen how to configure a backup. We have seen when a VM is backed up, the recovery points are generated, what are the different recovery types, and how the recovery types are defined. All these things is something that we have just seen in the part of this demo. The other important thing even to review is backup now. Apart from the scheduled backup, you can also use this backup now option to trigger an ad hoc backup. Sometimes you may have a need that you want to take a backup now. So just use this option to do an ad hoc backup. So this is how we've seen backing up a VM or configuring a backup on a VM from a vault, and that can also be done from VM screen itself. So this is a VM app VM1, and this is a VM screen. So what you can do is you can go to the operations section, go to the backup part, and you would see that same screen. So you can navigate to this particular section from the VM screen itself. So app VM1 is something that we have been discussing now. And I just wanted to show that how you can navigate it from VM screen as well. And in case this is a new VM app VM3, which we have created, but it's not backed up currently. So if you go to operations backup, here is where you can just at a very single quick basis, you can just uh, select the vault, select the policy subtype, say I want to use my existing vault which we were using. I select the backup policy 2, and just click on enable backup, and this is how you can very easily configure backup on a VM from the VM screen itself or the VM flow itself. So this covers about backing up a VM. Now let's also see the restore mechanism. What are the different restore types? How you can restore a VM? So as we have discussed, that different recovery points can help you do recovery. So let's say we want to use this particular recovery point to restore our VM. Say something happens and we end up in a situation where we want to restore our VM. You click on this uh, uh, right part, and a drop down comes with the option restore VM and file recovery. So these are different restore mechanism that is available for you to choose. We will talk about each of this recovery mechanism going forward, but for now what I'll do is I'll just select restore VM. You have that recovery point selected, and you have different restore configurations that you need to select. You can create a new VM, you can replace existing. I'll show you a create new VM flow. So you've selected a create new VM. You enter the name of the new VM that you want to say. After the VM has been restored, you would want some name for that. So I give its name as restored VM. Subscription is selected. Uh, Azure VM, the resource group, I select a virtual network, and a staging location. So staging location is nothing but a storage account that is used as a staging location for your restore. Uh, you need to create a storage account and select it for your staging location. Uh, One thing to note over here is please make sure that this storage account that you used as a staging location is not used by too many apps. Otherwise, you'll see some uh, issues, as in your restore time might be impacted, as it might be overloaded with the operations of other apps also. So just a small caveat over here. So staging location is nothing but a storage account. And after doing all this setting, you can just click on restore. And that will, after the restore operation is completed, you'll have a new restored VM. So similarly, we have different options like replace existing, where you can just select the staging location and click on restore, and you'll have the corresponding restore completed. All these are different restores that are available in backup. We would be talking about different restore mechanisms available after this demo. But yes, this is how the restore happens in backup. Uh, After this, I would also want uh, you to have a look at the monitoring part, a bit of monitoring part. The Vault also gives you a high level overview of uh, pre-checks. There is no pre-check in critical or warning state. There is no backup job as of now, which is in progress or failed state. We have two backed up items using this vault, the backup storage, etc. So that can be selected using this backup tab. The other thing to note over here is even the backup jobs. So you can go to backup jobs and you can review the jobs. Uh, um, uh, so what you can do is just select the filter, say the duration that you want all the jobs to be enlisted. So I select start time as 15th, end time as today. Click on done. You'll get all your backup jobs uh, in this list. You can see that we have few configure backup jobs. We have backup jobs for app VM1 and app VM2. So we had two VMs backed up using this vault, and we also triggered a restore on this particular day, 17th of March. So let's just double click on any of one of this backup job and then and the restore job. Let's say this is a backup job. You could see that this the VM particular VM is app VM1. What is the backup size? Snapshot took around 7 minutes. Transfer of data to the vault took around 1 hour 13 minutes. So it's not that when a snapshot gets transferred to the vault, it's instantaneous. It takes some time to transfer snapshot to the vault. Let's also see for the restore, one of the restore job that we did for this particular VM. So app VM1 was the original source VM. We uh, created a new VM or a restored VM with the name app VM1 restored, the VNet names and all, and then you'll see the status of the data back from Vault and creating the virtual machine. So this is where you can see the stats of your backup and recovery jobs. So this in all covers in detail about uh, backup, how to configure backup, how the snapshots and recovery points are triggered, how you can use those recovery points to trigger a restore, how you can monitor your backup jobs and restore jobs using Recovery Service Vault. Now, one thing to discuss, Sharmistha, is uh, we've touched upon different restore types as a part of this demo. So I think now is the time to tell our viewers what are the different restore types that Azure Backup has to offer. So should we discuss about that to tell users the different restore types available? So this concludes the demo, and let's discuss the restore types. Over to you, Sharmistha.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that demo, Shubham. It was, oh my God, a lot of information and a lot of live performances we saw of various actions which we had been talking about for such a long time, right? So you touched upon restore also, and we did see various restore type options where we were actually performing restore. So I think it's a good time to actually touch upon what all restore options are available for the customer. And this table is actually complete data information on restore types. I think the first one is pretty obvious, which is create a new VM, which is the one which Shubham had also selected when he was performing the demo, right? So you can actually go up and create a new VM from any of the selected restore points. The new VM is always created in the same region as the source region. So create a new VM, the first one. Second one comes restore a disk. So some situations may arise where you do not actually want to restore a complete VM, but actually just want to perform a restore from a couple of disks, let's say, and that's where the restore disk mechanism and the option comes into the picture. And in this case, disks are actually copied to a restore which you provide. There are various ways by which you can provide this input information. You can use provided backup templates, or you can also just create a VM and attach a disk to it. You can create uh, rather than creating a new VM, you can actually restore these disks to an existing VM also. So create a new VM and restore the disk, or use some templates and then restore the disks, or just use an existing VM and then restore the disks. All three options are available for your usage. And a typical example of where restore disk comes into the picture is when you actually want to enhance the VM, right? Maybe you want the configuration of VM to be scaled up or scaled out, change the SKUs, change the number of CPUs, etc. And that's where a restore disk comes and really helps our customers. Next option is replace existing. Now, in this option, you can restore a disk and actually use it to replace an existing disk. So in this case, Azure Backup takes a snapshot of the existing VM before replacing the disk and stores it in the staging area which you specify. So it's easier to perform restore in that case, but one thing to catch a hold of in this scenario is that your current VM must exist, because it's always replacing a disk is always being performed on the existing VM and not some other VM. If it's been deleted, then this option cannot be used. Uh, Next option is the one which is kind of important for this whole slide, which is cross region restore, also known as secondary restore. So all the above options which we talked about, they were concerned with performing restore to the primary region, which is the region where your VM is actually running. But with cross region restore, you can actually perform restores to another region, and this is the Azure paired region for your primary region. You can always perform recovery to any other region, and you can perform both create a VM recovery or restore disks recovery. So both the options are available. We don't currently support replace existing disk option with cross region restore. And lastly, obviously, we have the file level recovery. You can restore individual files from a recovery point by mounting the particular snapshot on any target machine. So that completes all the restore types available for us. And actually, I think one question I have here is Shubham, we have given our viewers everything they want to know about how to actually restore, but encryption is an important part of security, and that's my next question. Do we actually perform or do we support restore of encrypted VMs also, or is that something which is not supported?
I think you brought a very fair point at this juncture. So yes, a lot of our customers prefer to use encrypted disk using Azure Disk Encryption, which provides them a more security posture, maybe due to some compliance and all, and be more security in terms of security that they would want to use the Azure Disk Encrypted VMs. So yes, Azure Backup do support such VMs. There are certain limitations, as you can see from the screen, that certain type of restore mechanism that you have told us, like file level and folder level restores, aren't supported. The replace existing VM, as you can see, the last point isn't supported. But yes, we do support backup and restore with certain mechanisms for this encrypted virtual machines.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that completes our whole presentation. And it takes me to my favorite section, which is the knowledge check. So all our viewers, keep your
So is
fingers
it
ready.
going to be an exam, Sharmistha?
Yeah, I think I think given the amount of data we have taught everybody, it's just fair to do a quick knowledge check and just check how many of us were actually listening to you and me talking about, or all of this droning has been for naught. So I think I'll quickly switch to my first question. Which restore type should you select if you want to replace a disk on an existing virtual machine? Uh, Option A, create a new VM. Option B, restore disk. Option C, replace existing. Please feel free to
Are
drop.
both of us also allowed to take this?
I don't think we should, just for being true to ourselves, please drop your answers in the chat window. And yeah, I'm just checking. So yeah, I think I'll go over to the answer now because it's a short question. So the correct answer is replace existing. So restore type replace existing should be selected if you want to replace a disk. Next question. You want to replace a disk on an existing VM but receive an error. What's the possible reason? The existing VM has been deleted and is no longer available. The existing VM is part of a different resource group in your Azure subscription. The existing VM is turned off. And now, any guesses? I think, yeah, I'll go ahead and show the answer, which is option A. The existing VM has been deleted and is no longer available. So yeah, that completes my Q&A, my knowledge check also. And finally, we are at the end of the session, and we started this session with a promise that we are going to deliver a packed session, and I think we have done well with our promise. Wouldn't you say so, Shubham?
Yeah, absolutely, Sharmishta. So I think there are a lot of key takeaways that we have from this session. We discussed the different use cases that backup supports, what exactly uh, Azure Backup is, different features, different workloads that Azure Backup supports, uh, features and capabilities that backup has to offer, different tiers. Uh, Last but not the least, the demo covered all that part of how to back up a VM, how to use the existing recovery points to restore a VM. So all in all, these were the key takeaways from this session.
Awesome. I think all the resources with this session are present in the Learn Live session link, which we had presented in the beginning. So do check out the Learn Live session if you have any more questions, and the complete theory is actually present there. Also, don't miss on the next session of this Learn Live. And thanks a lot for listening in. Thanks a lot for joining in.
Thanks a
Hope
lot,
you
everyone,
enjoyed.
for joining this session.
Yeah.
That
Thank
is
you.
it from our side. Thank you.
Bye.